Chevron Deference. Never heard of it? Well, good. That's what we're going to talk about today. It's one of the two news stories this week out from the United States of America that I really want to put on your radar. Welcome to Quickfire. This is a new video series that I'm introducing for my Substack subscribers. Not everyone, I've been told from feedback, not everyone wishes to read my articles. 7 minutes. Sometimes people just want to have a more interactive video content. So I'm experimenting with reintroducing my old Quickfire series with a new facelift. So here we go. Chevron Deference. On Friday in the United States of America, a legal decision was reached by the Supreme Court of the United States, one with massive consequences. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court of the United States killed, murdered, exterminated the 40-year-long legal precedent that conservatives for the whole 4 decades of its existence have wanted to put an end to. Chevron Deference. Now, what is it? Chevron Deference goes back to 1984. In 1984, there was a legal case involving an oil giant, and it gave federal agencies wide powers to interpret laws and decide the best ways to apply them. In short, to put it simply, Congress passes a law. Sometimes Congress passes very lazy legislation. There are gaps in it. So how do you fill in the gaps? That's where Chevron Deference kicked in. Federal agencies, therefore, fill in the gaps. And judges are obliged to show deference to those agencies' interpretations of legislation, interpretations of legally mandated, congressionally mandated regulation. So it basically resulted in agencies being able to fill in the gaps, and judges were obliged to respect and defer to the interpretations of ambiguous parts of statute to the agencies. Now, conservatives in America absolutely hated this, especially people such as the Koch, Charles Koch. Now, Charles Koch, for those who don't know, is a billionaire, mega donor to the Republican establishment. Not so much Donald Trump, and not so much the national populists like Steve Bannon, but he's definitely a big backer for the sort of Bush variety, Mitch McConnell variety, country club Republican, big corporate conservatism. And Charles Koch in 2020 got involved in all of this that helped bring down Chevron Deference. 2020, the herring fishermen of America decided that they'd had enough. What happened? Trump administration introduced new regulations saying that fishing vessels had to pay for federal monitors on board those fishing vessels themselves. Prior to Trump 2020, prior to Trump deciding that, what happened? The federal government paid for those fishing monitors. And hey, if you're a fisherman, you want to go out fishing in the United States, you have to have a federal monitor. So now the fishermen are having to pay for that federal monitor on their fishing vessel every time they went out to go and fish. Naturally, they weren't very happy. So the herring fishermen of America entered this chat, as it were. And what happened? Commercial fishing companies, supported by Charles Koch, among other big conservative mega donors, decided to launch legal challenges. In one particular one of interest here, the federal judge ruled that the National Marine Fishing Services could legally impose costs under Chevron this cost under Chevron Deference. So, fast forward to today, or rather Friday last week, Chevron Deference was tossed out. The Supreme Court of the United States in a 6-3 decision decided, there ain't no Chevron Deference here. So that means that the conservative majority of the Supreme Court has severely weakened the powers of agencies in America, such as the Environmental Protection Agency, to take one example. This is a seismic decision. There's going to be whose implications will be felt throughout the federal government in the United States. And it's a huge blow to the Biden administration, fresh off of the back of the disastrous presidential debate, which raises questions which are entirely legitimate about Joe Biden's cognitive state, whether he's capable of getting through the next 4 months of a presidential campaign, never mind the next 4 years serving as president in a second term. But we don't want to get into that this time. But now this Biden White House has suffered a huge defeat in the Supreme Court, giving executive agencies more freedom to interpret laws, in the conservative view, vastly expanded the federal bureaucracy in an unaccountable fashion. So that they welcome the fall of Chevron Deference and the defeat the Biden administration had in the Supreme Court. Now, an example of this I could talk to you about would be the Pennsylvania House Republican Caucus. We've seen out of their Republican representative out in Pennsylvania way, Jake Banta, has praised Friday's Looper Bright Enterprises versus Raimondo 6-3 Supreme Court decision. It overturns the 1984 Chevron versus National Resources Defense Council. So what did he say? He's basically saying the overturning, I'll quote, the overturning of the Chevron doctrine represents a new day in preventing government overreach in our nation. Chevron led to the oversized federal government, ruled by bureaucrats, not elected officials. This decision makes it clear our government, both federal and state, must be in the hands of the people. End quote. Now, fair enough. What the fall of Chevron Deference absolutely does rein in the power of federal agencies and the bureaucrats who work for them. Now, where there are gaps, federal agencies no longer get to be the gods of their own brief. They now don't get to fill in the gaps, make their own interpretations, and not have legal courts just accept it. There can now be pushback, which is fair enough for accountability over regulation. After all, these are bureaucrats, these are administrators, these are civil servants. They're not politicians, they're not directly elected. However, it's not really as simple as the Conservatives would make out, because let's think more broadly here. Corporate businesses bring a court challenge against a federal agency's interpretation of a regulation, and what happens? It's now the judge deciding. Now, judges are wonderful people most of the time. You always want to be nice to judges. You never know when you'll find yourself up in front of one. But judges could be the highest. You could have a judge who's got the highest IQ, the most diligent attention to detail, but that judge might not be an expert in the scientific balance of how much mercury should be in a water pipe before it violates an EPA regulation. I mean, judges are very intelligent people, but they're not experts in every brief. The whole point of a federal agency in the United States, or a government version of it in the UK, is that these are experts, doctors, scientists, PhD holders. These are expert people with high levels of qualification in a very particular field that they furrow. Not everyone has that kind of expertise, So yes, it is a blow against a sort of ever expanding federal bureaucracy, but at the same time, on the other hand, it's basically handing the power to judges, who are not now any longer obliged to defer to experts. So there's a flip side to it. We are in a situation where, think of it, workplace safety, financial markets, environmental courts, and by extension, businesses, think of all of that. Businesses contemplating legal challenges to regulations against agencies, interpretation of laws, they're all going to start kicking in, and it's going to be judges deciding it, not Congress. It's going to be judges going to be deciding this in America now. And judges, in some states they're elected. You've got federal judges who are appointed to federal bureaucracy. We've already seen the politicization of the judicial system in the United States of America. This is a worrying further step. The Supreme Court has, by paring back agency powers in recent years, been saying that there are major questions of policy for Congress to explicitly detail in order for agencies to take action. Fair enough. What can be wrong with that? Well, has anyone looked at Congress in the United States of America lately? It's hardly productive. The polarization, the footballification, and the tribalism of American politics has never been worse. The idea that Congress, House of Representatives, the Senate, they're all going to work together and suddenly start detailing forensic detail over gaps in legislation so that regulations to protect the environment can take place. Give me a break. You've got Republican senators who don't believe in global warming, and you've got Democrats who insist that biological sex doesn't exist. So we're dealing with people, the extremes of both Democrat and Republican parties. The extremes are now the tail wagging both dogs. The idea that you're going to have Congress explicitly detail the gaps in legislation so that federal agencies can take action is for the birds. It's not going to happen in practice. So what we're really talking about here is who loses? Who loses? Well, Biden administration, sure. The federal bureaucracy, absolutely. Some may think that's a good thing, but let's listen to Liberal Justice Elaine Kagan. According to Elaine Kagan, she says the fall of Chevron Deference means that the presidency, Congress, courts, they're no longer in an equilibrium of balance in terms of the separation of powers. She's saying that they're no longer equal under the US Constitution because of this. Now, advocacy groups, progressives who are also outraged, they see this as a setback for, say, clean water or public health, fair lending, workplace safety, because these are things that rely on the federal government bureaucracies for help. The corporates, big corporates that are bringing the legal challenges now that Chevron Deference is gone, against regulation, knowing that Congress is completely dysfunctional and won't be filling in the gaps. And now federal agencies can no longer have the deference to be experts and fill it in on Congress's behalf. The people who are losing here are the people who need regulation. Workplace safety, clean water. Flint, Michigan didn't have clean water because of failures of regulation, failures of the federal response. That situation is going to be even worse if it should reoccur. So, asbestos disease awareness organizations, for example, have called the ruling a quote, monumental setback that will harm all Americans and profoundly impact the nation's environmental safeguards and public health protections, end quote. So the Supreme Court of the United States has brought down Chevron Deference, weakened federal agencies, written a blank check for corporate America, bankrolled by big Republican establishment donors such as Charles Koch, billionaire, to now bring any legal challenge they want against any regulation they want, against any federal agency they want. And it's now a matter, it's all in the hands of the judge, who no longer needs to show deference to the experts who understand the science and in the ins and outs of the regulations. And hey, Congress, who are we kidding? That dysfunctional rabble, they're not showing any attention to any detail going forward. So this, I'm afraid, is a body blow for all of those in America who rely on protections by federal agencies. But hey, I did hear that Steve Bannon, who just went to jail today, certainly happy. People welcoming and celebrating the fall of Chevron Deference seem to be, by and large, the country club Republicans and their corporate overlords who bankroll them, but also people like Steve Bannon, the MAGA movement, because for them, they in their fantasy see this as a victory against the deep state, the administrative state. But hey, just hope you don't need to rely on environmental protections in America anytime soon, because Chevron Deference has went the same way under this conservative Supreme Court as a woman's right to reproductive health care. It's all gone. the most reactionary Supreme Court in the United States of America, making some of the worst legal decisions in my personal interpretation since, I don't know, Plessy versus Ferguson. Hey, but that's the first episode of Quickfire. Chevron Deference. It's dead.